Macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. A successful sterilization operation leaves the country's total monetary base completely unchanged. The answer is true. The base expansion from buying an asset is exactly offset by selling an equal amount of macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. Monetarists hold that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon from rapid money growth. The answer is true. Friedman's famous thesis, persistent inflation cannot occur without macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. In a deep liquidity trap, expansionary fiscal policy becomes highly effective. The answer is true. Government borrowing won't push up rates, so there's no crowding out and the multiply macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. The money demand curve shifts right when total real national income Y increases. The answer is true. Higher real income means more transactions, so households need macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. A rise in the general price level P shifts the demand curve for nominal money to the left. The answer is false. Higher prices require a larger nominal quantity for the same real transactions. Macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. Central bank independence is generally linked to lower average inflation across developed nations. The answer is true. Independent banks can resist political pressure to print money for short-term or a macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. Depositing $1,000 of physical cash into a checking account changes M1 by 0 immediately. The answer is true. M1 includes both cash and deposits, so the transaction just shifts. Macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. Open market sales of government bonds by the central bank contract commercial bank reserves. The answer is true. Banks pay for the bonds from reserves at the central bank, shrinking. Macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. If the central bank pays higher interest on excess reserves, banks generally lend more to the public. The answer is false. Higher interest on reserves makes banks park cash safely at the central bank. Macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. The transaction demand for money is driven mainly by money's function as a store of value. The answer is false. It's driven by money's function as a medium of exchange that facilitates. Macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. Speculative demand for money rises when people expect market interest rates to climb soon. The answer is true. Expected rate rises mean falling bond prices, so people hold cash to avoid macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. Hyperinflation typically sends the velocity of money V to extreme levels. The answer is true. As money loses value by the hour, people spend it instantly, sharply accelerating. Macro pop quiz. Money and banking. True, false, or uncertain. In quantitative easing, the central bank typically buys government securities from the secondary market. The answer is true. It buys existing bonds from private financial institutions, not direct. Macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. The monetary base, or high-powered money, equals cash in circulation plus total bank reserves. The answer is true. The base B is the central bank's direct liabilities that feed the macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. Under a gold standard, a country keeps complete independent control over its monetary policy. The answer is false. The money supply is tied to gold stocks and flows, which removes money. Macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. During deflation, the real value of cash rises over time, even if nominal interest rates are zero. The answer is true. Falling prices mean a fixed nominal dollar buys a larger macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. Credit cards and digital phone payments generally reduce the public's transactional demand for cash. The answer is true. Digital options let people complete transactions while holding less. Macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. Seigniorage is the revenue a government earns through its unique power to issue money. The answer is true. It's the profit when the value of money created exceeds the cost. Macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. A lasting drop in consumer confidence can shrink broad money M2 even when the base is fixed. The answer is true. Fear makes banks cut credit and consumers repay debt, shrinking the macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. The nominal interest rate can be seen as the direct opportunity cost of holding liquid cash. The answer is true. Holding cash foregoes the nominal interest you could earn on a bond or macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. With an internal injection, the eventual money supply expansion depends on the size of the multiplier. The answer is true. The deposited cash becomes new reserves, multiplied through successive macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. Raising the money supply during high cyclical unemployment can temporarily expand real GDP short run. The answer is true. With sticky prices, added liquidity lifts aggregate demand, raising macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. The zero lower bound is the barrier where nominal rates can't easily go much below zero. The answer is true. Push rates deeply negative and depositors withdraw funds as physical cash. Macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. Velocity of money is nominal GDP divided by the total money supply, V equals PY over M. The answer is true. It captures how many times an average dollar changes. Macro pop quiz. Money in banking. True, false, or uncertain. When the central bank sells foreign currency reserves to defend the exchange rate, domestic money supply contracts. The answer is true. It absorbs domestic currency from local buyers in exchange for foreign cash. Macro pop quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Expansionary fiscal policy means raising government spending, cutting taxes, or both, to stimulate demand. The answer is true. These inject disposable income and direct demand into the economy, boost macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A budget deficit occurs when government tax revenues exceed government expenditures in a fiscal year. The answer is false. A deficit is the opposite. Expenditures exceed tax revenue. Macro pop quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The national debt is the cumulative total of all past budget deficits minus any past surpluses. The answer is true. Deficits add to the debt stock over time, while surpluses let the macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. In the simple Keynesian model, a 10 billion spending rise boosts GDP more than a 10 billion tax cut. The answer is true. Spending hits demand directly as macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The tax multiplier is always mathematically positive in standard macroeconomic models. The answer is false. It's negative. Higher taxes cut disposable income, lowering consumption, macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. If the MPC is 0.8, the simple government expenditure multiplier is exactly 5. The answer is true. The multiplier is 1 over 1 MPC with macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Automatic stabilizers adjust tax revenues and spending without any new legislation. The answer is true. Progressive taxes and unemployment benefits automatically adjust to cushion economic macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. During a recession, automatic stabilizers cause the government's budget deficit to shrink. The answer is false. Recessions cut tax revenue and raise benefit claims, which naturally macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A structural budget deficit is the part that persists even at full employment. The answer is true. It reflects long-term policy imbalances between spending and taxation, into macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A cyclical budget deficit is caused purely by a downturn that lowers receipts and raises welfare spending. The answer is true. It disappears on its own once the economy recovers to macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The crowding out effect says expansionary fiscal policy can raise interest rates and reduce private investment. The answer is true. Government borrowing lifts demand for loanable funds, pushing rates up and macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. If crowding out is complete, a rise in government spending leaves total aggregate demand unchanged. The answer is true. The fall in private investment exactly offsets the rise in macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Ricardian equivalence says consumers treat deficits as future taxes and save their current tax cuts. The answer is true. Forward-looking households anticipate future taxes to repay debt, neutralize macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. If Ricardian equivalence holds perfectly, a debt-financed tax cut fails to stimulate aggregate demand. The answer is true. Households save the whole cut for future taxes, so consumption. See Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A regressive tax system takes a higher percentage of income from wealthy people than from low earners. The answer is false. That's progressive. A regressive tax takes a higher Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A flat tax ensures every citizen pays the exact same absolute dollar amount in taxes. The answer is false. A flat tax applies the same rate to all incomes, so higher earners still. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. When the government issues new bonds to finance a deficit, it borrows from the loanable funds market. The answer is true. It sells bonds to private investors, banks, and foreign institutions to. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The debt-to-GDP ratio is often a more meaningful sustainability measure than the absolute dollar debt. The answer is true. It scales the debt against the economy's capacity to generate tax revenue. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A balanced budget amendment requiring G equals T each year makes fiscal policy more procyclical. The answer is true. It forces spending cuts or tax hikes. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. By the balanced budget multiplier idea, equal rises in spending and taxes leave aggregate demand unchanged. The answer is false. The balanced budget multiplier is exactly 1, so equal rises in G and T lift GDP. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A higher marginal tax rate reduces the numerical value of the Keynesian expenditure multiplier. The answer is true. Taxes are a leakage. A higher rate passes less disposable income into the. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A marginal propensity to import above zero strengthens the domestic fiscal multiplier. The answer is false. Imports are a leakage sending funds abroad, which dampens the. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. If a nation's debt is entirely held by its own citizens, it creates zero net burden for future generations. The answer is false. Servicing it through taxes can redistribute wealth unequally and create Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A government can lower its debt-to-GDP ratio without a surplus if nominal GDP grows faster than debt. The answer is true. If the GDP denominator outgrows the debt numerator, the. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The Laffer curve illustrates the theoretical relationship between tax rates and total revenue collected. The answer is true. Beyond a certain point, higher rates discourage work and reduce. Macro Pop Quiz. Fiscal policy and debt. True, false, or uncertain. By Laffer curve theory, cutting tax rates always automatically maximizes total government revenue. The answer is false. Cuts raise revenue only on the prohibitive side of the curve, where rates are macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Contractionary fiscal policy is typically used to fight high cyclical unemployment in a stagnant economy. The answer is false. It's used to cool an overheating economy and curb inflation, not to macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The gap between spotting a problem and passing fiscal legislation is the implementation lag. The answer is true. It's an internal policy lag created by political debate and macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The impact lag of fiscal policy is generally shorter than that of monetary policy. The answer is true. Approved spending enters the economy directly, while monetary policy works through slow macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. If the central bank aggressively monetizes the deficit, fiscal policy effectively becomes monetary expansion. The answer is true. Buying newly issued debt with newly printed money expands the monetary macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A rise in transfer payments like Social Security is a direct increase in the government purchases G component. The answer is false. Transfers are redistributions. They affect GDP only when recipients spend them, macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Discretionary fiscal policy requires deliberate legislative action to change taxes or spending. The answer is true. Unlike automatic stabilizers, it needs new laws or budgets, macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. If households are very pessimistic about the future, the short-run effect of a tax cut weakens. The answer is true. Pessimism raises precautionary saving. So households save the cut, macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The primary budget balance excludes government interest payments on existing debt from the calculation. The answer is true. It focuses on current revenue versus program spending, macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A severe sovereign debt crisis can leave a country unable to borrow at reasonable rates on global markets. The answer is true. High default risk makes investors demand extreme premiums, driving borrowing costs to macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Infrastructure spending can lift both short-run aggregate demand and long-run aggregate supply. The answer is true. It raises current construction employment, AD, and improves long-term productivity, macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. With flexible exchange rates, expansionary fiscal policy can appreciate the currency and crowd out net exports. The answer is true. Higher rates from borrowing attract foreign capital, strengthening the currency and macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The Keynesian school argues prices and wages are perfectly flexible, making fiscal intervention unnecessary. The answer is false. Keynesians hold that wages and prices are sticky short run, so markets can't quick macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. If the marginal propensity to save falls, the government expenditure multiplier gets larger. The answer is true. A lower MPS means a higher MPC, so households pass on more of each dollar, raising macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A progressive corporate income tax acts as an automatic stabilizer for the business cycle. The answer is true. Profits and tax payments surge in booms and fall in recessions. Macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Under a strict expenditure cap, a government cannot use discretionary expansionary spending in a crisis. The answer is true. An absolute statutory cap legally bars lawmakers from raising spending, blocking macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Deficit spending in a depression is highly likely to cause immediate hyperinflation despite idle capacity. The answer is false. With high unemployment and idle factories, extra demand pulls idle resources into output, macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A massive national debt can reduce a government's room to respond to future unexpected crises. The answer is true. High servicing costs tie up revenue, leaving fewer fiscal resources for macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. Capital gains taxes are levied on the profit from selling non-inventory assets like stocks or real estate. The answer is true. They apply to the appreciation of investments when they are sold, macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A rise in government spending funded entirely by domestic borrowing shifts the aggregate demand curve left. The answer is false. Expansionary spending shifts AD right by injecting spend macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The net interest burden is the government's annual debt interest payments as a share of GDP. The answer is true. It measures how much annual output is swallowed purely by macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. If a tax rebate is made permanent, consumers are generally expected to spend a larger fraction of it. The answer is true. Per Friedman and Modigliani, permanent income changes alter lifetime wealth and macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. A high national debt can cause debt overhang, where firms cut investment fearing future tax hikes. The answer is true. Uncertainty over how the state will balance its books Dieter's long-term private capital macro pop quiz, fiscal policy, and debt. True, false, or uncertain. The golden rule of fiscal policy says governments should borrow only to invest, not to fund current spending. The answer is true. It ensures debt builds productive public assets that generate future return. Macro pop quiz, ADS and Phillips. True, false, or uncertain. The AD curve slopes downward mainly because of the wealth, interest rate, and exchange rate effects. The answer is true. These three mechanisms explain why a lower price level raises the total quantity of. Subscribe to Macroeconomics with Michael. Like, share, and drop your answer in the comments.